Chris Clark is in a way better mood today than he was yesterday. He is dancing behind the scenes to our elevator music intro there.
It is elevator music. We're compiling our own highlight reel for someone to leak later. Luckily, nobody could nobody could leak our show unless it's one of us, so we'll know who did it.
Yes.
And actually, it would only be you because you do all the production value.
Yep, and we have not had to beep either one of us out yet, so
not yet.
That's good. But anyway, he's Chris. I'm Wes. This is GC Live, day 2, rolling along. Man, I'll tell you, it seems like once a season gets rolling, it just rolls. And here we are.
Right.
Turning the page a bit from Tennessee. I'm sure we'll still go into that a little bit. I think the fan base is still reeling a little bit from what I see online, but talk a little bit of that. And I think, Chris, the conversation sort of turns to Florida, but then the Tennessee game maybe through the prism of what does it mean going forward, as opposed to just what happened Saturday night, more how much of this is correctable, how much of this is something we're going to see more of this season, what changes do you make if you're South Carolina, and sort of going from there. So I think that's sort of the way the focus of this show will sort of turn out. We'll obviously take some questions, but again, this is GC Live, brought to you by AffordableMedicalUSA.com. Hit them up, 803-926-1493. You see the graphic above our head. That is home of the Game Day Chair, which Chris will tell you a little bit more about later on in the show. But, okay, so listening to Muschamp today, he obviously looked back a little bit at Tennessee still, talked a little bit about Florida as well. I completed my rewatch of the game, took a bunch of notes on yesterday. But Chris, I think first of all, we have to start with the injuries because that's, I guess, the biggest news from the day. South Carolina getting, really, I would say, positive news on Izzy Muschamp and Jamar Brown, but some somewhat surprising and not good news on Sherrod Greene. And potentially, I mean, dude, we're talking about a 10-game SEC schedule. So there's 9 games left. There is a bye week. So about 10 weeks, he's going to miss 4 to 6 weeks. So depending on how many he actually misses and how serious this injury is, this could be a big loss for South Carolina, with Greene suffering a subluxed hip and a fracture in his hip, a very just odd injury, according to Will Muschamp. But, this is the first major injury of the playing season for South Carolina. Obviously, Marshawn Lloyd was the big one in the preseason, but as far as a guy missing a large amount of time, this could have him out for half of the season, which obviously is going to hurt South Carolina, I think.
Yeah, I mean, half or more. And, so if there is some good news to take from it, maybe you get him back later in the year. And then, the other thing is he's got to work himself back in, playing shape-wise and all those things. Don't know, like, when you start recovery. There's no surgery, as Muschamp said. You don't have to think about it in terms of, okay, if he's going to miss the next 4 games, 5 games, 6 games, you don't think about a red shirt at this point. You don't say, well, let's hold him over because everybody's got a free year. So it looks like you'll get him back, but for these next several games, it becomes more difficult. You're already down a little bit. You're counting on, you got a freshman in Muschamp, got Damani Staley playing the will, who had a good spring. He got a lot of work in this spring because Ernest Jones was out. Spencer Easton Riddle was a guy that they got back, preseason, who's on the depth chart and is a guy that could play and might factor in a little bit more for them now, in Muschamp. So Rosendo Lewis won't be cleared for, I think, a couple more weeks, Muschamp said. So, that's the sort of difficult thing is that, first of all, it takes down a starter, but then your depth is probably not ideal there at that linebacker spot. And Sherrod's a guy that has had some ups, some downs during his career at South Carolina, but he's certainly progressed during his career to where he's been playing better. And so losing him, I think, is certainly a blow. But this is a team that, we knew they couldn't afford a lot of injuries to key players. So far, they've been in decent shape. If they can get Muschamp back, get Brown back, get Huntley back in a week or two as a guy who could help up front, even as a true freshman. I think that'd be a positive for this team. They just can't have these things, happen. I saw the Greene play, and didn't see exactly how he fell, but it looked like just one of those things just maybe fell the wrong way, sort of an unusual situation.
Yeah, man. So I think you look, and obviously I would have put linebacker as one of those positions where I feel like they had good depth as far as good rotational depth, good enough rotational depth in that there's plenty of guys to where you don't have to play the same person the entire game. Now, in the case of Ernest Jones, he's not coming off the field most games unless there's a reason for him to come off, right? I think he's sort of earned that. He's going to be on the field at all times. Now, they are happy, I think, with what Damani Staley has done, basically all preseason camp, stepping up, being able to sort of play some Mike, play some Will, and be a veteran in that linebacking core. I do think, that there's a little bit more pressure on Damani now as a starter than there is sort of being more of a special teams / role player at linebacker. I think Sherrod gave you a little bit more from an athleticism standpoint as far as being able to match up. And, that's something if I'm Florida, especially with some of the weapons they have, I'll be curious to see if they try to exploit, someone being out for South Carolina in this linebacking core. And, I think looking forward, how much does Mo Kaba start to insert himself in this lineup eventually as far as being in the rotation? You have your snap count up on GamecockCentral.com right now for subscribers. Did Mo get any snaps on defense? I didn't see him out there.
No, didn't play any snaps. But man, I think you're right. I think he might have an opportunity to come in and spell. I mean, he was the second guy that, would you take Sherrod out of the equation? Now it falls to Damani, and then the question becomes, well, who's the backup now? And so Mo Kaba is the first guy out of Will Muschamp's mouth. Physically got a ton of ability, right? They really, really like what he brings to the field. Obviously, when you're talking about playing that linebacker position, as a freshman, it could be difficult because there's going to be a lot of things thrown at you from really high-level athletes. I think of this week, really tough ask, right? Because not only are you thinking about, okay, playing within the defense, playing assignment football, playing fast, taking on big linemen, now you're talking about, okay, we got Kyle Pitts to deal with, right? If you're thinking about the defensive staff, how much are you willing to play a freshman, even though he's really talented and physically is probably one of the better guys on the team in terms of matching up, being able to turn, run, be physical. But now you're talking about Kyle Pitts, who Muschamp likes to talk about that C area, talk about lining up against linebacker, matching up against linebackers. Kyle Pitts is a really, really difficult ask. And Dan Mullen, I think, is probably going to look at the tape and say, where can we put this guy? Kyle Pitts can hurt corners, safeties, linebackers. And so that, I think, is going to be a key matchup, when it comes to this weekend. So that does beg the question, how much is Mo Kaba going to play? I think the answer is he's definitely in line for playing time now, probably as soon as this season. But it's going to be a storyline to watch for sure.
Yeah, and the answer, Chris, today may be different in 3, 4, 5 weeks. So, we'll see. So what's up to everybody? I see some folks. I see our normal guys getting in on YouTube. Appreciate all the support. Craig, Graham, Josh, Stikeman83. We got JEE on here. Chris, they are calling you out for taking your shower right before the show.
It could just be my new hairstyle. Y'all don't know.
Yeah, it could. Y'all don't know Chris Gels' hair. Like, if y'all not true at all. But I mean, if Axe Shower Gel or Irish Spring or whoever wants in, we'd love to have you as a sponsor. That's a really good call, JEE. So, man, I think I wouldn't say much big coming out of the presser today, like breaking type news other than the injury report. Obviously, some little things here and there that I think you can pick up on moving forward for South Carolina as far as what it means, against Florida. Like I said earlier, the Izzy news sounded positive to me. Anytime these guys say he ran around some, that doesn't, that really doesn't tell you how much they actually practiced.
Right.
So it was funny. Jamie Robinson used the same exact terminology when he was asked as Will Muschamp, did later on. They ran around some, but sounded somewhat positive, I would say, for Izzy. Anytime there's a groin injury like that, I think you have to be careful with it. Obviously, you don't want to push it back too soon, but very clearly, man, with a Florida offense that's going to spread you out, we know they're going to put a bunch of weapons on the field. Even their tight ends run like receivers. So this is a big game for South Carolina's cornerbacks, for the secondary in general, and having Izzy out there just because, and we had a question about, will South Carolina play a lot of dime this week? I think if they're healthy enough and if the right guys are performing well, then yes, absolutely. I think you're going to have to get as much athleticism on the field to try to match up. We saw Muschamp mention Brad Johnson. Maybe he gets on the field a little bit more this week as more of a buck in some pass rush situations, because for the most part, I don't know if your regular package is going to be used a ton, against Florida. So more athleticism, the better, because Mullen's going to spread you out. He's going to try to pick you apart. He's going to hit all his weapons. And probably, I'm trying to think of the rest of the schedule off the top of my head, this may be possibly your biggest task of the year as far as just pure ability to go up and down the field in the passing game in particular, and just playing against a guy who's always going to have a plan. He's got a great feel for the game from a play calling standpoint, and he's going to throw something different at you probably too that you don't necessarily expect. So the secondary has a huge task this week.
They do. And, there's a clip that's been circulating from Rogers from the SEC network. I always get his name mixed up. But, he's talking.
That would be Jordan, right?
Jordan Rogers, yeah, about how Dan Mullen ran the same play like 10 times, against Ole Miss. And that's something that Muschamp has talked about. I think he talked about it some in this press conference, but he talks about it other years before they played Florida, or even when they played Mississippi State. Remember in 2016, they went to Starkville and played Muschamp's first year, to where Dan Mullen will get to the same play in a variety of different ways. Maybe some eye candy, maybe they could look different, but they have a lot of base plays that they're going to go to. And he just does a really good job structuring that offense. You look at Kyle Pitts, you look at Copeland, Grimes, Kyle Trask has done a really good job with his accuracy. 6 touchdowns in that game. Both teams, Florida and Ole Miss, were explosive offensively. Both teams went over 600 yards. There were, Florida had 32 first downs and Ole Miss had 29, right? So there's a lot of offense. Both teams over 600 yards. Ole Miss was even more explosive in the passing game. Florida averaged 6.8 yards a rush. People tend to think of Florida, and it's accurate, and they think of Dan Mullen, they think of Florida as, passing the football. Certainly Trask lit it up. Kyle Pitts had 8 catches, 4 touchdowns, but they ran it for 6.8 yards a carry, and so when you're that explosive and that multiple, that diverse, it certainly helps your running game. And so they were difficult to deal with, and both teams had a lot of possessions because there's a lot of offense in that game, right? So what you can expect is South Carolina to keep that pace, offensively. South Carolina, I don't think anybody can pick them to go in and put 600 yards on anybody, especially going down to the swamp right now, right? So I would think that their plan is try to possess the ball more, try to limit Florida's possessions because they are potentially so explosive. So it is tough in terms of the matchups, that they're going to have to face, and they're going to have to find a way to affect Kyle Trask. No
doubt, man. Got to shout out a few more people. My long lost buddy, Wendy Goss, went to high school with Wendy. She's actually my distant cousin. She's on Facebook watching. And apparently Chris Stikeman is Stickman. The Y in there threw me off, but at least we'll get your name right next time. Stickman, an avid watcher here on our YouTube /Facebook /Twitter podcast show live, whatever the heck this thing is we're doing. But dude, so I was listening, and by the way, if y'all want to hear what Dan Mullen had to say, get some Florida perspective, I did steal their video and upload it onto the Gamecock Central YouTube as well. I haven't listened. He talked for like 35 minutes, I think. I haven't listened to the whole thing yet, but I did watch the first maybe 10, 15 minutes of it. And he had some interesting comments just about how offenses are maybe actually a little bit ahead of defenses right now in some instances because, and this was his maybe guess or thought on why, is that when they were doing the walkthroughs, you were able to have a football out there. And now I didn't think you were able to actually deliver the football, like throw it. But Dan Mullen said you were. So maybe I'll check into that. But basically, his point being when they did all this extra work, defenses weren't out there hitting people and tackling. So that was his maybe guess on why the offenses have been able to get in a little bit more work as far as actually doing what they do in a game than the defenses, which even in scrimmages, you don't really these days, how many scrimmages did South Carolina have? 2, 3, but you're not hitting the entire time sometimes, even with the scrimmages. So it does take a little bit of time for your defenses to catch up to the physicality that you're going to see. And I think maybe that extends out to some of the line play as well, but certainly tackling now from a South Carolina perspective. And I think Mullen's point from their perspective was that they struggled with some tackling issues, some ball pursuit issues. He even said effort. I didn't see that from South Carolina. Now, I saw a few mental mistakes, which maybe goes back to lack of reps. And if one guy's out of a spot, you can get sort of, it can mess you up at this level. But I didn't see effort, or I didn't really see tackling issues. I think Carolina had 11 missed tackles in the game, which for a game one SEC opponent is really not bad, Chris.
Yeah, I think Muschamp noted that they had 3 or 4 on one play. So people look at, say, 11 missed tackles. That's not acceptable, but that's not, you're not going to go through an SEC game or a high-level opponent without having missed tackles. Sorry, that's the way it is. Any team in the country, you're going to have some level of missed tackles. Obviously, you minimize those, but when you play against skill guys, and Florida is going to be a taller task in my view than Tennessee, but Tennessee's got a couple good backs. They have some receivers that, have a little bit of speed and some skill. I think Florida's will be a tougher ask, and so it will be a huge, question in this game. But you're right, man. I think the mental – I didn't see any effort issues with South Carolina either. Close game pretty much throughout. I mean, South Carolina was down 14 at one point, but it was a close game. Plenty of effort. Like you said, just some mental mistakes. Maybe even the effort overrode some of those things. I mean, you think about the busted flea flicker play, right, where the Sam linebacker doesn't take the player to the flat and it left it open, and they're able to get, I think, a 33-yard gain on that. That's a play where your player's trying to go rush the quarterback. He's on a busted play. He's showing effort, but it was just a mental mistake because he didn't do his job. Muschamp mentioned how, sometimes when they went back on tape, some of the runs that they got gashed on by Tennessee, were a player, is peeking in another gap, not doing his job. And so those are the types of things where it becomes a question for this defense of, they can be better because we've seen they've got some athletes, that if they can stay healthy, they're capable of being really good. We saw that in spurts. But when they get in trouble is when they have those mental mistakes. So can they clean those things up after game one? We'll have to see, and they're going to have to do it against an opponent that I think is a good bit more dangerous than Tennessee. Not as good up front, but quarterback play and skill position play I think is more dangerous.
Yeah, I agree absolutely. And Paul called me out there on Facebook a little bit. If you have a ball, you can probably throw it out there. But my point being, there are certain really weird rules when it comes to the NCAA about when you can do what. And some walkthroughs, involve going out and just literally doing walkthroughs. And some walkthroughs involve you actually being able to go out there and deliver the football a little bit. So, and I don't know exactly what time period Mullen was talking about. And I don't even remember the various rules when they went to, they had walkthroughs and they had like the OTA style walkthroughs and they had the actual practices. And there were more sort of different segments of as far as how things were broken up this year, this preseason, than there ever have been before. So let's talk receivers, man, because that's going to be a topic. It has been all off season. According to one of our posters on Gamecock Central, we've been hyping up Rico Powers to be apparently the next Alshon Jeffrey or AJ Green. But anyway, so I thought there were some interesting comments from Muschamp today because he was asked, hey, what about more receivers getting involved? And his response I thought was sort of telling. He said, well, more guys have to get open. And, you know, we've seen comments about, well, why haven't other receivers gotten the ball? Certainly in the case of, you know, people asking about Luke Doty was not on the field. But some of the other receivers were on the field. I believe you can probably surmise that there were some plays called that could have gone to them if they had been open, from what Muschamp said. So I think you look at the receivers not named Shi Smith, not named Xavier Legette. Legette did make some plays for South Carolina. Muschamp's waiting on those guys to step up. And I think right now he reiterated it. It goes back to last year, right? We talked about this. Teams are going to play man coverage on South Carolina. They're going to continue to do that. They're going to just match up however many receivers Carolina has out there. They're going to put that many, you know, cornerbacks on the field. They're going to play man coverage, and they're going to say go win against, you know, man press. And until South Carolina's other guys can step up and do that, it's probably going to be a lot of Shi Smith, some Xavier Legette, and then tight ends and running backs. So I think that, to me, that stood out a lot, that Muschamp was sort of so forward about it. He said, look, to get other guys involved, other guys are going to have to get open.
Yeah, so a few points there. Totally agree with you, and it's a good point. Look, here's what we talked about after the Tennessee game. Shi Smith had a really good game overall, 10 catches. That doesn't get done every week. Hasn't happened around here a lot. Mike Bobo, I thought, did a really good job of scheming Shi Smith open. Colin Hill, you know, he was not always the primary read. Muschamp pointed that out, but he was getting open. You know, he's the one guy on this roster you can point at that will most consistently get open. They also schemed up some stuff for him and put him in some good situations. Tennessee knew that going into. They could look at the roster and look at the past production and say Shi Smith's going to be the guy they're looking for. So Mike Bobo, given that, still did a really good job, and Colin Hill did a good job finding him. But what we said right after the Tennessee game was, look, going forward, teams now have some things on tape of they know how Mike Bobo is going to use him, and so they're going to have to figure out other options. They need more production from other guys, period. Like Muschamp said, you know, aside from Legette and Smith, they just didn't have any guys that affected the game. They didn't play fast enough, is another thing that he mentioned. Now, even more than ever, teams now have something tangible to put on tape on Shi, and they're really going to even more being key in on him. Another thing Muschamp pointed out was you can't really change, okay, we're going to bracket our coverage on this guy in the middle of the game. It's a little bit harder to make that adjustment. Now teams maybe go in a little bit more, that they've had a little bit of a taste of what Mike Bobo's doing, and he's got more tricks in the bag, I'm sure, and can make adjustments himself, but they'll be keying in on that even more. So it becomes more of a concern even after game one of what are you going to do. You know, I thought Mike Bobo did a good job of structuring the offense and trying at least to spread the ball around. They got the running backs involved, got the tight ends involved, could have been involved more, you know, and just looking for those guys. So it'll be on him to scheme those things up. It'll be on those players to get open, to run the correct routes, for the offense to find a block, for Hill to find him. But it is even more, you know, urgent, I think, to find some other offensive playmakers now more than ever.
By the way, we've got somebody weighing in on Facebook. I want to mention here. Is this the Noah Whiteside, former Gamecock receiver? Noah, is that you? I think it is from the icon. I can't see any of your other pictures on the chat, but one of the most iconic plays, I would say, of the Spurrier era was the very first touchdown against UCF on that Thursday night. Steve Spurrier dialing up the old Mills play deep down the middle from Blake Mitchell to Noah Whiteside. What's up, Noah? Hope you're doing well, man. Good to see you around. Comment in there and let us know what you're up to, man. Had a question about Kevion Mullins. He played what, Chris? 4 snaps?
Yeah, I think it was 4. So, yep.
So he was out there. They rotated the other tight ends in a bit. One thing I maybe wasn't surprised about, but one thing I did notice was that Adam Prentice played a decent amount up sort of H-back in some of those 2 tight end sets as more of a tight end than he did a fullback. So, and one thing I think you and I noticed at Colorado State, man, is that he'll move his fullbacks around. Like, you're not just a statue who just lines up at fullback and doesn't really get involved in other aspects. You are lined up at fullback sometimes. You're lined up as a second tight end at times. There was even a play where the fullback was motioned all the way out to the field side, spread way out. And basically what that does is it forces Tennessee or whoever your opponent is to make a decision. If they're playing man coverage, are we going to vacate one of our linebackers and take him all the way out of the box, to the sideline, or are we going to frankly waste covering a cornerback, covering a fullback with a cornerback? So I thought that was an interesting wrinkle. That was down near the goal line at some point in the game. I don't remember exactly when, but so they do some different things with their fullbacks, with their tight ends. I think we will continue to see them do more of those things, particularly with the receivers not necessarily stepping up yet, other than Shy and Xavier Legette. Maybe you get Mullins a bit more involved. Maybe some of the other tight ends. I think the running backs will continue to be a big part of the passing game. They had some key plays, but then I do think South Carolina is going to have to get better execution on some of these screen throws is a big part of what he did at Colorado State. You and I were sort of texting a little bit. Some of these screenplays were like one block away from going from. And the thing about a screen, it's like the line between no gain or a loss and a potential big play is like very thin, And it's like sometimes a screenplay is sort of all or nothing. And if the defense can sort of defeat one block, then they blow up the play. But if they don't, there's like this one opportunity to make the stop, and then there's a lot of grass in between that first line of defense and then the safeties, who have a lot of times been run off down the field by other guys. So, I mean, there was one play where Carolina had a screen set up for Shi Smith. One of the offensive linemen comes out, and we don't know what his actual responsibility was, but if he hits one guy, this play went for nothing. It's probably 10 or 15-yard gain. So I think knowing how big the screens were at Colorado State, that's something that has got to be something they clean up moving forward.
And I remember even at Georgia, the running back screen game was so big. That wild game, the Melvin Ingram fake punt game, 45-42, both teams put up. Well, Georgia put up even more offensive points because South Carolina had, a special teams touchdown and at least one defensive touchdown. And Georgia just kept going up and down the field, scored late. I think Bobo's threw, 37 running back screens in that game. It was all over the place. So it's certainly something he likes. They had some, when Zaquandre White came in the game, I was always keying in on, is this a running back screen, right? Because that's sort of his bag. That's something that could potentially excel at with his space abilities. But he just didn't really get that much of a chance. He had one or two plays, whether it was a run play or a screen, that was sort of blown up. I remember they had one, I think it was a receiver screen on the perimeter that, the receiver blocking sort of in the slot got blown up by a safety coming down. That ruined the chance of that play. So they've got to get better in that category too. We're talking about receivers and tight ends constantly in terms of catching the ball. they got to get better in terms of perimeter blocking as well. I did see some good things on some of the runs. Xavier Legette stood out sometimes for his perimeter blocking on some of the perimeter stuff that the running backs were doing. Harrison Fenwick later in the game to the right side. But the screen game is something that if they could, get that situated, if they could hit a couple of those plays, it would really, really help. Totally agree with you there.
Yeah, and we'll see if that plays out there. All right, I'm gonna hit a few questions through here. Somebody, I don't know, has anyone else heard this or seen this? Have you seen this, Chris? Somebody asked, and generally we don't really deal in rumors, publicly, but one of the guys asked, did anyone hear about a fan supposedly cussing out Ryan Helinski on Saturday night? That's completely new to me. Yeah, have you seen anything about this anywhere, Chris?
No, I heard a lot of cussing at the game. I didn't hear that specifically. No.
And why? I mean, I don't understand. Why would somebody be cussing out somebody who didn't play in the game? I don't. If you can, provide a little more info on that, go for it. But I don't really know where that came from. Let's see. Question about Brooks. Yeah, nothing new on Brooks. They're still working through it. Muschamp said. And man, Chris, I still think that's a huge part moving forward. If they can, even if it's week 3, week 4, whenever it is, I think getting him in the mix would be big for this team and something that obviously there'll still be a complaint, right? And that you didn't have him for however many weeks he misses. But I think at any point you'd certainly rather have him than not have him. So, all right, let's sort of, and we're going to have a Florida guy we hope on the show later on this week, Chris. But I'm looking at it. What is the path to a South Carolina win in this game? Because I do think we're sort of at that moment where all we have to read in on or read too much in on is 1 week. But 1 week of South Carolina and 1 week that we've seen from Florida says that this is going to be tough. There's a reason that this is almost a 3-touchdown line in Vegas. So I think, and I don't know if you have a feel for it yet, but it's going to be interesting to see as the week goes on. Is there a real path other than just Florida, does not play well to South Carolina winning this game? But before you answer that, tell everybody about Affordable Medical USA and the Game Day Chair.
Yeah, so as you guys know, Affordable Medical Equipment and the Game Day Chair is our primary sponsor here on GC Live, so we appreciate that. So, look, if you're a Gamecock fan this season, chances are much higher, especially this year in 2020, you're watching the team play from the comforts of your own home. Home's definitely comfortable. You got your big screen, your couch, your AC or your heat as it keeps getting colder, clean bathroom, beverage of choice, right? But you may be missing the most comfortable chair you've ever experienced, and that is Affordable Medical Equipment's Game Day Chair. It's the Maxi Comfort Cloud with Twilight technology, and that's a recliner that can put you in a variety of positions, including the Twilight position, which is a zero gravity position. It features a power pillow, lumbar adjustment, custom positioning with the push of a button. And also you can check out an upgrade of Brisa fabric, which is what they use in Gulfstream jets if you really want to be highfalutin. So to maximize your comfort on game day, check out the Maxi Comfort Cloud with Twilight. How you find them? AffordableMedicalUSA.com. Search for the Maxi Comfort Cloud. If you're on YouTube, which we hope you are, look down in our description. We got a link there, or on GamecockCentral.com's front page, the GC Live story module. There's a link in there for the Game Day Chair too, so you make sure you check that out.
Good stuff, man. So what's your path to a South Carolina W?
Well, I was actually asked this earlier today doing a Gators podcast, Gator-centric podcast, and here's what I think. South Carolina lost the game versus Tennessee because they lost the turnover battle. This is what Jeremy Pruitt said after the game. He said, look, we didn't play all that well. South Carolina certainly didn't play as well as they could either. But the bottom line was South Carolina turned it over twice. One of them was a pick six, and then Tennessee did not turn it over. And so that was really the key in that game. You had You can't, when you got two evenly matched teams, you can't lose a turnover battle. Certainly, you can't expect to go down to the swamp and lose the turnover battle again. This is something that Muschamp's talked about even today. He said, we have got to get the ball off people. We discussed this yesterday, Wes. I mean, first 2 years, they were really good in that category. They were as good as anybody in the SEC or even in the country. And then the past 2 years, it's sort of gone backwards for whatever reason. And so they've got to get back to that. Offensively, they can't turn it over, certainly not for defensive score. They're going to have to go down there and win the turnover margin, I think, by 2, by 3. So they're going to have to find a way to force some Florida mistakes. Offensively, they got to take really good care of the football. They got to play an extremely clean game, certainly much more clean than they did last week. And they're going to have to, I think, capitalize, on any scoring opportunities that they get. But my biggest one is that turnover margin. You have absolutely got to force some turnovers in this game. That's what we saw South Carolina last year, that shocking, Georgia game where they go down to Athens. What was the difference? Georgia, probably you think of the more talented team, probably the better team. That day they weren't because they turned it over, one of them being an Israel Muschamp pick six, 3 interceptions overall. It's not going to be a formula to win a game in the SEC. So South Carolina wants to recreate that. I think that's what they have to do against the Gators.
By the way, a couple of people are asking about the Muschamp presser. That is, if you go to our, if you're already on our YouTube, just click over. That is now up on our YouTube page. If you're watching on another platform, it's just youtube.com/GamecockCentral would be the best, easiest way to find it. So, yeah, I think you're right, man. I think Stickman and some of the other folks in our chat here have it right as well. You got to put pressure on Kyle Trask. And I think with Florida, man, you've got to find a way to get them out of a comfort zone, right? I mean, you look at Ole Miss and that Jordan Rodgers video you were talking about earlier, the fact that Florida ran essentially the same play. Now they're doing it out of different formations. They're doing it with a little bit, window dressing here and there. But for Trask, and this is something we've heard people say about Mike Bobo as well, it can look different to the opponent, but to the quarterback, it's one read, right? Not one read, but it's the same read. And in a lot of these plays, or in some of those plays, and I thought, by the way, side note, Jordan Rodgers, I would say, has really developed into being a good on-air presence, analysis guy. Was very impressed with that video. Yep. Did a really good job of explaining it. And, I think you watch it and you learn something, right? Well, Mullen is known for this, where he's got a little bit of spurrier to him in that if you don't stop it, he's going to continue to run a concept until you show you can stop it. Now, the concept that he ran against them, it may be a completely different go-to concept that he runs this week. So South Carolina is certainly going to prepare for that little, he called it circus, which is basically, a corner with a flat underneath it on one side, a post or a dig, depending on middle of field open, middle of field closed, down the middle, and then a basically like a hitch comeback with a flat route attached to it on the backside of the throw. If you haven't, just go to Jordan Rodgers on Twitter if you haven't seen this. Really good stuff. Well, Mullen's going to keep doing stuff like that until you show that you can stop it. And I think the other thing about that stood out was there was actually a couple of times where Trask got to the third, the fourth, and then even the fifth read on this call, right? So the fact that anytime a quarterback is getting to a fifth read, for one, means the guy's very, very comfortable in this offensive scheme and in whatever play call that you're in, right? But it also means your offensive line is giving you a tremendous amount of time to work through those things and a complete entire field read too, right? I mean, this is not – a lot of times coaches will simplify and cut the field in half, or it's a 1-2 read to one side, and then it's just a quick, a drop off to the other side. He's doing full field reads from one side to the other, working himself back around. So to me, that tells you both of those things. He's very comfortable, and that this offensive line did a really good job against Ole Miss.
Yeah, so that to me is another key. Could South Carolina win up front? Big challenge facing the Tennessee offensive line because that's a good group. South Carolina, they had some drives where they got gashed by the run, particularly the one where Tennessee tempoed them some. They've got to clean those things up. But ability-wise, South Carolina matched up fairly well against Tennessee. They had one play where they almost got a turnover. Garantano was able to fall on the football, but they affected them. Garantano said after the game, a lot of people were pointing out, well, if Garantano was better throwing the football, that would have been a different game, which I totally agree with. He had some guys open, but the difference was South Carolina did a good job affecting him. Garantano said, I felt pressure, I anticipated pressure, and so I sailed some throws. That's good defensive football up front. So if Trask has all day to stand back there, it's going to be an extremely long day, and a side piece of that is that they're going to be able to run the ball effectively from that point. Something Muschamp pointed out today, and we talked about it a little bit earlier in the program. Mullen wants to run the ball. What we talk about Trask and Pitts and the receivers, he wants to go run it. They were almost 7 yards a carry against Ole Miss. If they even approach that against South Carolina, it's a long day. So that's what they've got to win this game up front to have an opportunity to go affect Kyle Trask and not let him stand back there and deliver the football and get Florida, like you said, Wes, off rhythm.
Yeah, and man, to give Trask credit, I would say this guy has improved a ton with his opportunity to play. I remember watching him first half last year, against South Carolina. I really wasn't even that impressed with what I was seeing. And now some of that may have been the weather and the fact that, it was raining all day. But I'm watching, I'm like, this guy's throwing lollipops out here. And, like, the ball was not coming out of his hand fast. Now, he throws, a decent spiral. It is catchable. But didn't really appear to have a very strong arm. And I even turned to the person I was watching the game with, and I was like, Trask is going to throw an interception soon. Like, it's going to happen because the ball is just not getting there as quick as most quarterbacks I see that come through Williams-Brice Stadium. And then sure enough, Jamie Robinson had a pick to start the second half. But then Trask actually made the big throws that needed to be made as the game went on, and South Carolina did not.
Yeah. And good pocket presence too. Like you think about that fourth down play that was so critical for Florida. He's out of the pocket. He buys a little bit of time and just sort of dinks it over to, I think, a tight end. No, it might have been a receiver. I'm not sure, but that was a key play in the game. And something Muschamp mentioned is just his pocket presence, even outside the pocket.
Yeah, so he operates like a veteran now. Yeah. Like, he's an older guy. He's comfortable. He is completely comfortable within this offense, comfortable with his weapons, and they go make plays for him. So, that it's going to be tough, and they may be the class of the East based on what we have seen so far. So we'll see. Now it's 1 week. We are all guilty of getting caught up in what we see in 1 week. If Florida's defense continues to struggle like they did against Ole Miss, there may be some opportunities for a South Carolina offense to continue to go out and score a little bit more than maybe we all anticipated them being able to do. Let's and we're probably going to close it out here shortly, but there were a couple of comments I wanted to get to from the chat on YouTube. Shy Smith, obviously, and I went back through the PFF stuff. 15 targets on Saturday with 10 receptions, obviously, career type day. He was one or two little things short of it being just an absolute elite day, right? The interception sort of going off him, a couple of drops, but and somebody had a point on here earlier. I think it was Stickman. Does he have the physicality to hold up for an entire season? Getting targeted 15 times in the SEC level, and there was a as WJM4 points out, there was a very obvious frustration level from Shy as this game progressed. Now, some of that, Chris, I think in a strange way, I think you kind of like to see, like you can tell he cares. He's competing. He's out there. It matters to him. And this was a very chippy game as it went on. The receivers are getting mugged with nothing being called. And that continued throughout the game. So
sorry, Wes, I didn't mean to cut you off there. Was there a holding on the line, on either line, like offensive line? I don't recall one.
I don't think so.
And I mean, and I get, so South Carolina's defensive line was frustrated. I'm sure at some point South Carolina's offensive line held Tennessee, because you don't go through a game like this without committing a holding penalty. It's really a question of, do they call any? Yeah, I mean, dude, Shy, there was a third down play where, I mean, I posted on Twitter, he got absolutely mugged. The DB, Slaughter, I mean, he had his back turned, he's pulling his arm, and he's pulling him down when the ball arrives, and the back judge just stares at it. Nothing. So, yeah, I mean, and Shaw's always been very demonstrative. I remember watching him when Union County came down. Steve Tannehill was there at the time, and Union County came down when he was an underclassman. It was 7-on-7, and Shaw was frustrated with how his team was playing. And so, pouring into that game, I think you could see it. Now, you don't want it to affect performance. I don't think it did, because he was up to the challenge the whole game, but I'm sure it was frustrating. And maybe you're right. It might be a positive that he cares. The alternative is he doesn't care. He's just sort of lackadaisical out there.
Yeah, and, I think moving forward, yes, Shy's going to be a big part of the game, and I think he'll be a big part of every game plan. But as we've said all show, him stepping up is good, but he's going to need guys around him to step up as well. But to the person's point, yes, Shy was fired up, but I think you kind of see why. And you want a guy to have energy like that. So as long as you can walk the line, and as long as, Muschamp pulled him over there and sort of hugged him and sort of calmed him down a little bit, you'd still rather have to calm a guy down than you would have to start him up. I want to get to one final thing, Chris. You mentioned this in your insider report. I don't know how much we've talked about it. I'm sure we've hit on it, but the second half play of the offense compared to the second half play of South Carolina's offense a lot of times last year has to be something that is considered a big positive, because, I mean, they scored, 4 of 6 possessions in the second half. Is that right? And
that's right.
Man, one of these possessions, they get a really nice run from White, I think, on first or second down. And I think they had a nice gain on first down. They were stopped just short on second down. And then they did that little end around handoff to Shy that was marked short on third down. So it was like you had a second and kind of short, then you had a third and short, and you didn't get it. But you're still, anytime you start a drive, sort of staying ahead of the chains. And I even thought, I was like, man, it'd be gutsy, but this may be a time. It's just 4th and 1. Colin Hill has shown an ability to sneak the ball successfully with his big frame. Keeping the offense on the field here and getting a first down would be massive, because they had some momentum. But point being, that wasn't a drive where they just went backwards. Like, they were off to a good start there as well. Second half offensively looked completely different than most of the first half. And considering how few times they were able to do that last year, I mean, Chris, you broke it down. I knew it, like, from the eye test, but I didn't realize how just demonstrative that difference was.
Yeah, so beginning of the Tennessee game, first drive of the Mike Bobo offensive era, they go down and score. So you go, all right, here we go. Then the rest of the first half unfolds. They got 7 points at the half, and you go, here we go again, with that. But then they come out and score 20, and they didn't do that last year. They did it against Charleston Southern. I think they had 28. That was obviously a rout from start to finish. So, Florida, I think last year they actually did score 17 in the second half. That was before the offense really, really fell off a cliff. But the problem was Florida scored, I think, 28 in the second half. I know they had 21 in the fourth quarter, right? So that was the biggest issue there. But Carolina just couldn't second half-wise. That's why we exited that season with so many fans talking about adjustments in the second half. How are you going to adjust? And so Mike Bowen made some adjustments, and they went out to their credit and executed them. So credit the offense and credit him for doing that. They did enough offensively in the second half, to go win that game. So that's going to be a key, throughout the season is when teams adjust to South Carolina. We've seen it at Florida 2 straight years. It happened in the Swamp. You remember the 2018 game in the Swamp. What was the story of that? Second half adjustments. And so obviously they're going to have to defensively play extremely well. They got a very tall order, but they're going to, have to adjust in the second half as well because Florida's, done a number on them the past couple years in that. Last year, again, better with 17 second half points, pretty good. But they got to be really good there, against Florida too.
Yeah, and man, Muschamp has got to be sick to his stomach if you look back at those last 2 Florida games. Both of them opportunities to win, right? Opportunities to go get key victories at the time, and South Carolina unable to do it in the in the big moments second, in the second half. Had another question about Joyner and Doty. I mean, Doty was not on the field. He'll get on the field this week. Joyner was on the field. He was out there a lot of times when they were in 3 receiver sets. It was either Joyner or Josh Vann. They rotated in. So, take from that what you will. But, they were looking at other receivers. I think it's just a matter, again, of guys being able to get out and make plays and get open. Let's take one more question here on Facebook. Keith on Facebook, did I misunderstand what I've been reading preseason that the O-line was one of our best units? What happened? Talent gap, failure to execute, just something that we'll be dealing with all year. I mean, I think, Keith, for one, and the way we sort of tried to phrase it would be that they are hoping and that the offensive line is going to need to be the unit that this offense leans on because there is talent at that position. There is some experience at that position. And that's not necessarily the case where you have a bunch of proven guys at some of the other positions on offense. I frankly thought the offensive line would be a bit more consistent against Tennessee, particularly when I read that Tennessee has struggled on their defensive line in preseason practice, right? I mean, I was a little bit surprised at some of the pressures across, around the edge that Tennessee was able to get on Saturday. But I do still think this is a talented O-line. I think in this league, you're never going to just be dominant on the offensive line. No. So for South Carolina, it's about the hope, and Billy on Facebook used the word manhandled in the trenches. I don't think South Carolina got manhandled throughout the game. I feel like at times Tennessee won the battle. Now, there were times in the second half when South Carolina was driving when they started really knocking Tennessee around and had some nice runs. I mentioned it yesterday, sort of to the outside on the perimeter where you're finding, you're gashing them out there. So it's easy to sit here and just say, well, the O-line got whipped. I don't think it's that simple. At times they got whipped, especially in the first half. At times they did some whipping of their own. So I think you look at it, there's definitely a lot to improve on, but I still think this offensive line has the potential to be much better than we saw on Saturday. But we also just have to keep it in perspective that you're going to see really athletic defensive fronts week in, week out.
Yeah, and when we talk about the strength, I think sometimes people sort of equate us talking about the strength of a particular side of the ball as meaning it's elite. And that's not what we mean when we say that, right? Like, what would have been anybody's pick about if you said, what's the strongest position on the team? What would have been anybody else's pick? Is it running back where they don't have Marshawn Lloyd and they lost 4 seniors? Is it tight end with Nick Muse coming back from an ACL and a bunch of unproven players? Is it receiver where it's Shi Smith and then hoping a bunch of guys step up? Quarterback Colin Hill, maybe, but he's even a question mark because of the health and just stepping into a new situation with unproven playmakers. It'd be the offensive line. And I do think sometimes people look at the stats, look at the rushing stats, or they look at sacks. For instance, sacks is a big one people look at. Well, we gave it this many sacks, the offensive line stinks. Well, one of those was on a receiver, one was on a tight end, one was a coverage sack, So, the running game, the passing game in terms of protection, all those things work hand in hand. And, you go back, I think you made a good point, Wes. First drive, South Carolina dominated Tennessee. First drive, they're pushing them back. There's plenty of time. Some of the other drives they dominated. Other times, Tennessee won some one-on-one battles. They sent some pressures, did a good job. They had a coverage sack. So there were some issues that were created. But the point is nobody you made a great point. Nobody is going to dominate from week to week. When people ask, when is South Carolina going to have a dominant offensive line? The answer is never. Nobody is going to have one. It just does not happen. Georgia's offensive line last year, has there ever been as much hype as that team on that offensive line? Like, ever. Loaded with 5 stars, NFL players, either current or future. They got whipped. South Carolina whipped them. It was one game. But the point is, I'm not saying everybody should be happy with the performance of the offensive line, say it was great, nothing needs to improve. But the word you use, perspective, I think you have to look at what's happening around the line and always keep in mind that, you're not going to be dominant on every play because the other team's got really good athletes too.
Yeah, and as Muschamp pointed out, sometimes it's a tight end. If one guy goes unblocked, right, that your play's not going to work.
Yeah.
And even, Muschamp mentioned the backside. And if you don't seal off the guy on the backside of a play and there's any type of disruption on the front side, then your running back has to hesitate. He's trying to be patient. And then guess what? This linebacker or defensive end from the backside of the play is closing in on you, and the whole thing gets blown up.
Yep.
So football, that's like the beautiful thing about football is that it takes every single person. Now, the difficult thing watching it, especially live, it's very difficult to pick up on what happened and watch all 11 kids at the same time.
Yep.
Sometimes, even if I'm rewatching a play, you got to go back multiple times just to see. So it's easy to say, oh, the O-line's got to do better. But is it one guy? Is it one position? Is it the tight end needs to block better? Sometimes the receivers need to block better? So there's more nuance, I think, than just being like, oh, the O-line's not any good. So anyway, man. Yeah, we're gonna effort a Florida media person. Maybe we'll get a former Gamecock on at some point this week as well. Otherwise, you got anything else for today, Chris?
I do have one more. My man Josh mentioned that the game day chair is just missing a mini fridge underneath. Josh, I know you. I know the game day chair is right up your alley or down your alley, whatever the terminology is. I think you should get it and see if you can fit a fridge under there, and then let us know. So yeah, that's my closing thought. Mini fridge underneath the game day chair. Appreciate everybody's participation. So Josh, let us know.
Yeah, let us know, Josh. Very good idea. All right, folks, we will see you tomorrow. I'm guessing probably 2:00 again. You know how it is. We are not always set in our times. We are set in our ways, though, I think. So for Chris, I'm Wes. If you're joining us late, check out the archive on YouTube, or if you want to just listen to us, we're on all the major podcast platforms, Apple, Google Play, all that good stuff. So for Chris, I'm Wes. We'll see you tomorrow.